My name is Gail, and I'm 32 years old. Standing outside that law office on that cold November morning, I clutched the leather folder that would change everything. My parents, who abandoned me 25 years ago, were already inside laughing and confident they'd inherit everything from my grandmother Eleanor. They hadn't seen me in decades yet, here they were, ready to claim what they believed was rightfully theirs. Before I reveal what changed everything that day, I'm curious where you're watching from. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, please like and subscribe to hear how justice finally found its way home. I was 7 years old when my parents, Harold and Patricia, decided their careers in California were more important than raising their daughter. They sat me down on our worn living room couch in Pennsylvania, my mother's perfume overwhelming, as she explained they needed just a few months to establish themselves out west. My father avoided eye contact, focusing instead on loading their sedan with everything they owned except me. They left me with Grandpa Arthur and Grandma Eleanor, promising to call every night and visit every month. Those promises dissolved faster than sugar in rain. The nightly calls became weekly check-ins, then monthly obligations, then yearly birthday cards with $20 bills tucked inside, and eventually nothing but silence. Grandpa Arthur was a retired mechanical engineer who spent his evenings teaching me algebra at the kitchen table, using chocolate chips as visual aids for complex equations. He'd worked 40 years at the same manufacturing plant, never missing a day, and he approached raising me with the same dedication. Every morning at 6:30, he'd make us both scrambled eggs and toast, quiz me on my multiplication tables, and walk me to the bus stop regardless of weather. Grandma Eleanor had been a legal secretary for 35 years before retiring, and she understood contracts, wills, and the importance of documentation better than most lawyers. She kept meticulous records of everything, including every missed phone call from my parents, every broken promise, every excuse. In the evenings, while Grandpa helped with homework, she taught me about standing up for myself, about knowing my rights, about never letting anyone make me feel less than worthy. The school events were the hardest. Parent-teacher conferences, where my silver-haired grandparents sat in chairs meant for younger bodies looking proud but tired. My 8th grade graduation, where I scanned the crowd, hoping maybe this time they'd surprise me. But finding only Grandma Eleanor with her camera and Grandpa Arthur wiping tears he blamed on allergies. The father-daughter dance. I couldn't attend because Grandpa offered to take me, but I knew kids would laugh at the old man with the cane trying to slow dance. When I turned 15, my parents called for what would be the last time in years. My mother's voice was distant, distracted by background noise from what sounded like a party. She explained they were simply too busy with their consulting firm to fly back for my high school graduation ceremony. Too busy. Those two words echoed in my mind as I held the phone listening to laughter and clinking glasses behind her voice, understanding finally that I wasn't just physically abandoned, but emotionally erased from their lives. That summer, Grandma Eleanor and Grandpa Arthur made everything official. They hired a family lawyer, filed the paperwork, and legally adopted me when I turned 16. The court process was straightforward, since Harold and Patricia didn't contest it. In fact, they seemed relieved when the lawyer contacted them, signing away their parental rights with the same casual indifference they'd shown when leaving me behind 9 years earlier. The adoption day was quiet, but profound. Judge Harrison, an elderly woman with kind eyes, asked if I understood what was happening, if this was what I wanted. I told her these were my real parents, the ones who stayed, who showed up, who loved me through actions, not just words. Grandma Eleanor cried that day, something I'd rarely seen, and Grandpa Arthur stood straighter than his arthritis usually allowed, proud to officially call me his daughter. Our life together was simple but rich with genuine affection. Saturday mornings meant pancakes shaped like animals, even though I was technically too old for such things. Sunday afternoons were for working in Grandma's vegetable garden, learning which tomatoes were ripe and how to properly prune roses. Grandpa taught me to change oil in his ancient pickup truck, to use power tools safely, to read blueprints and understand how things work beneath their surface. Grandma Eleanor shared stories of her youth, of meeting Grandpa at a dance hall in 1968, of raising Harold, and wondering where she went wrong that he could abandon his own child so easily. She never spoke badly of him directly, but I could see the disappointment etched in the lines around her eyes whenever his name came up. She'd given him everything the best education money could provide, opportunities she never had, love that should have taught him to love others. They weren't wealthy, my grandparents, but they were careful with money. Grandpa's pension and their Social Security covered our needs, and Grandma Eleanor had invested small amounts over decades that grew slowly but steadily. They talked about leaving me something someday, but I always changed the subject, unable to imagine life without them. College acceptance letters arrived the spring I turned 18, and Grandma Eleanor framed the one from State University like it was a masterpiece. They'd saved every penny they could for my education, even selling Grandpa's beloved vintage motorcycle to ensure I wouldn't need student loans. I majored in accounting, drawn to the precision of numbers, the way debits and credits balance perfectly when you did everything right. The first semester was challenging, not academically, but emotionally. I lived in the dorms during the week, but drove home every weekend needing to see them to reassure myself they were still there, still mine. Other kids complained about their parents calling too much while I treasured every voicemail from Grandma Eleanor asking if I was eating enough vegetables. Everything changed in October of 2018, when Grandpa Arthur collapsed while raking leaves. The diagnosis was pancreatic cancer, advanced and aggressive. The doctors gave us 6 months if we were lucky, 3 if we were realistic. I withdrew from classes that same day, moving back home without hesitation. The registrar tried to convince me to take incomplete grades instead to finish the semester, but I knew where I needed to be. I called Harold and Patricia from the hospital waiting room, finding their number through an old business website. My father answered on the 5th ring, his voice confused when I identified myself. When I explained about Grandpa's diagnosis, there was a long pause before he said they'd try to send a card. A card. His father was dying, and he offered to try to send a card. Those next months were simultaneously the hardest and most precious of my life. I became an expert at managing medications, learned to navigate insurance claims, discovered which foods Grandpa could still enjoy when chemotherapy destroyed his appetite. We spent hours looking through photo albums, him telling stories about each image, making sure I knew our family history, even if parts of it had walked away. Grandma Eleanor aged 10 years in those 6 months, watching the love of her life fade. She'd sit beside his hospital bed, knitting scarves nobody needed, her fingers needing something to do, while her heart broke incrementally. At night, I'd hear her crying softly in their bedroom, trying to muffle the sound so I wouldn't worry, not knowing I was crying too, in my childhood room down the hall. Grandpa passed in April of 2019, on a surprisingly warm spring morning, with sunlight streaming through the hospice windows. He'd waited until both Grandma and I were there, holding his hands, telling him it was okay to let go. His last words were instructions about the lawnmower's maintenance, and telling us both he loved us more than all the stars in the sky, something he'd said to me every night as a child. The funeral was small, just neighbors, and his former co-workers, people who actually knew him. Harold sent flowers with a generic card from a website where you could type a message and they'd print it. Patricia didn't even do that much. I gave the eulogy talking about the man who chose to be my father, when my biological one couldn't be bothered. And I didn't try to hide my anger at the empty spaces in those pews. After Grandpa died, Grandma Eleanor seemed to shrink, as if she'd been inflated by his presence, and now slowly leaked air. I moved back home permanently, transferring my credits to the local community college to finish my degree while taking care of her. She insisted she didn't need help, but I'd find her standing in the kitchen holding a can opener, having forgotten what she meant to do with it. We found our rhythm eventually. I handled the household tasks that required strength, or climbing she managed the cooking, and kept the house spotlessly clean. In the evenings, we worked together on a business plan, using her experience and my education to create a small accounting firm we could run from home. It gave her purpose, something to focus on besides the grandpa-shaped hole in our lives. The business started slowly. Just a few clients who knew us personally. But word spread about our reasonable rates and meticulous attention to detail. Grandma Eleanor handled scheduling and correspondence with her perfect grammar and professional manner, while I managed the actual books and tax preparation. We made a good team, finding comfort in routine and shared goals. By 2020, we had enough steady clients to make a modest profit. Grandma Eleanor seemed stronger, more like herself, though she still set 2 coffee cups out each morning by habit. She started talking about the future again, about expanding the business, about me finding someone special, and giving her great-grandchildren to spoil. That's when she also started organizing her affairs with an intensity that worried me. She met with lawyers, updated documents, created detailed lists of assets I didn't know existed. When I asked about it, she'd pat my hand and say she wanted everything clear and organized. No confusion, no fighting. Fighting between whom I wondered, since it was just us. She revealed things gradually, almost cautiously. The house was paid off years ago, and worth far more than I'd imagined due to development in the area. There were 3 rental properties she'd inherited from her parents that she'd never mentioned, all with long-term tenants and positive cash flow. Investment accounts that Grandpa had started in the 70s that had grown substantially. Life insurance policies, bonds, certificates of deposit. One evening in June of 2023, while we sat on the porch watching fireflies, she said something that chilled me despite the warm air. She looked at me with those sharp blue eyes and said I needed to prepare myself because Harold and Patricia would come back when she was gone. They'd smell money like vultures smell death, and I needed to be ready. She stood up with effort, went inside, and returned with an old brass key on a ribbon. She pressed it into my hand, closing my fingers around it. This opened a safety deposit box at First National Bank downtown, she explained. When the time came when I needed it, everything I required would be there. She made me promise not to open it until after, not to ask questions now, just to trust her. I wanted to tell her to stop talking like that she'd outlive us all out of pure stubbornness. But something in her expression stopped me. Instead, I tucked the key into my jewelry box and tried to forget about it, though I noticed her watching me more intently, memorizing my face like she was storing up images for a journey. August of 2023 started with unusual heat and humidity that made Grandma Eleanor's arthritis worse. She moved slower, needed help with stairs, began using a cane she'd previously rejected as making her look old. On August 15th, I heard a crash from the bathroom and found her on the floor, conscious but unable to get up her right hip at an angle that made my stomach turn. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and medical terminology I half understood. Hip fracture surgery required complications due to age and osteoporosis. As they wheeled her into surgery, she grabbed my hand with surprising strength and reminded me about the key, about being ready, about being strong. While she was in surgery, I did what I dreaded. I called Harold and Patricia again. This time, Patricia answered, her voice artificially cheerful, until she realized who was calling. When I explained about Grandma Eleanor's fall and surgery, her first question wasn't about prognosis or visiting hours. She asked how bad it was, if Grandma was still mentally competent, if she'd said anything about her will recently. Harold called back an hour later, his tone different, suddenly concerned and paternal, in a way that felt like wearing someone else's clothes. He asked detailed questions about Grandma's condition, about her doctors, about who was making medical decisions. When I told him I had power of attorney, there was a long silence before he said they'd try to visit soon. They arrived 3 days later, looking prosperous and tan-dressed in clothes that probably cost more than Grandma's monthly medications. Patricia air-kissed my cheek like we were acquaintances at a cocktail party, commenting on how I'd grown while studying me like she was calculating my worth. Harold shook my hand formally, his palm soft in a way that spoke of a life without manual labor. In Grandma's hospital room, they performed a careful dance of concern. Patricia held Grandma's hand briefly before sanitizing her own, talking about how difficult it must be for me to handle this alone, how they wished they'd known sooner, how they wanted to help now. Harold stood by the window asking about insurance coverage and whether Grandma had good doctors, maybe specialists they could recommend. Grandma Eleanor watched them through eyes foggy with pain medication, but still sharp with awareness. When Patricia mentioned how expensive quality care facilities were, Grandma's heart monitor beeped faster. When Harold casually asked if she needed help managing her affairs during recovery, she closed her eyes and pretended to sleep. They stayed in town for a week at a hotel despite my reluctant offer of the guest room. Each day they visited for exactly an hour, bringing flowers and asking questions that circled around money like sharks around blood. They wanted to know about the house, about the business, about Grandma's retirement accounts, all disguised as concern for proper management during her illness. I started noticing things going missing from Grandma's room. First, her reading glasses disappeared. Then her address book, finally her wallet from her purse. When I confronted them, Patricia acted offended, while Harold suggested I was stressed and misremembering where things were placed. But I saw him photographing documents when he thought I wasn't looking, saw Patricia copying phone numbers from Grandma's phone. The night before they left, Harold cornered me in the hospital cafeteria. He spoke about family responsibility, about how they wanted to ensure Grandma's assets were properly managed, how they'd been consulting with an estate attorney to understand their rights as her son and daughter-in-law. He showed me business cards from 3 different law firms, all specializing in inheritance disputes. After they left, Grandma Eleanor seemed to deteriorate. The doctor said it was normal after major surgery at her age, but I knew better. She was withdrawing, preparing, saying goodbye in increments. She had me bring photo albums from home, going through them page by page, telling me stories I'd heard before, but listened to like they were new. In early October, she developed pneumonia, her weakened body unable to fight properly. We moved to hospice care, a quiet room with garden views that she never really saw. Harold and Patricia were notified, but didn't return, sending instead an enormous flower arrangement that took up too much space and made the room smell like a funeral parlor. The last week, she was rarely conscious, but in her lucid moments, she'd squeeze my hand and remind me about the key, about being strong, about knowing my worth. She told me she loved me more than all the stars in the sky, echoing Grandpa's words, making sure I knew I was chosen, wanted, loved completely. She passed on October 27th at 3:17 in the morning while rain drummed against the windows. I was holding her hand, telling her about the business, about the client who sent cookies, about the neighbor's new puppy, normal things that connected her to life even as she left it. Her last breath was soft, peaceful, like she was finally going somewhere she wanted to be. Harold and Patricia arrived the next day, dressed in black designer clothes that seemed purchased for the occasion. They took over the funeral arrangements, choosing the most expensive everything, a sterling silver casket, exotic flowers, a reception at the country club neither of my grandparents would have ever entered. They introduced themselves to everyone as the grieving family accepting condolences, while barely acknowledging my existence. During the service, Patricia delivered a eulogy about a mother-in-law she described with generic platitudes that could have applied to anyone. Harold spoke about family values and legacy, never mentioning his decades of absence. I spoke last, talked about the woman who taught me to be strong, who showed me that family was chosen through actions, not blood, and I didn't care that my words made them shift uncomfortably in their front row seats. The day after the funeral, while I was still raw with grief, they appeared at the house with their lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Richardson, who specialized in estate law. They wanted to do an inventory to secure valuable items, to ensure nothing went missing before the will was read. I stood in the doorway blocking their entrance and told them to leave until the official reading. Harold's face turned red, the mask of concern slipping to show anger underneath. He reminded me this was his childhood home, his mother's house, his inheritance by rights of blood and law. Patricia added that they'd been consulting attorneys who assured them that biological children had priority over adoptive arrangements, especially when those arrangements happened later in life. I wanted to scream at them to point out the irony of claiming rights they'd abandoned, but instead, I closed the door in their faces and listened to them threaten legal action from the porch. After they left, I went to the bank and opened the safety deposit box, finding everything Grandma Eleanor had promised, and more. The law offices of Thompson and Associates occupied the entire third floor of the newest building downtown, all glass and chrome and modern furniture that whispered money. The will reading was scheduled for 9 in the morning on November 15th. Nearly 3 weeks after Grandma's funeral time, Harold and Patricia had spent building their case. They were already in the conference room when I arrived, seated at the polished table, with their lawyer Richardson and another man I didn't recognize. Patricia wore pearls that caught the light, her hair perfectly styled, her expression one of patient suffering. Harold had a leather portfolio open in front of him, documents spread out like evidence of their claim. They looked up when I entered, and Patricia actually laughed, a tinkling sound like breaking glass. She asked what I was doing there, if I was hoping to contest something, if I didn't understand how inheritance law worked. Harold didn't laugh, but his smile was worse, condescending and dismissive, like I was still 7 years old being left behind. Richardson started to object to my presence, citing something about direct heirs only. But then George Thompson entered. He was Grandma Eleanor's attorney for the last 20 years, a tall man with silver hair and kind eyes who'd known my grandparents since before I was born. He greeted me warmly by name, ignored Harold's extended hand, and took his seat at the head of the table. Another woman entered, a court reporter, who set up her equipment silently. Thompson opened his briefcase, removed a sealed envelope, and began the formal process. He read the standard legal language about sound mind and body, about last will and testament, about the wishes of Eleanor Marie Davidson, formerly Eleanor Marie Whitman. Patricia interrupted almost immediately, stating for the record that she and Harold were the sole biological heirs, that any prior wills should be considered under undue influence, given Eleanor's age and medical condition. Richardson added that they had documentation proving Harold was never legally removed from succession, that adoption of an adult grandchild didn't override biological children's rights. Thompson listened patiently, then continued reading. The will was dated January of 2020, witnessed by 3 people, including a doctor who certified Grandma Eleanor's mental competence. It was updated twice, once in 2021 and again in 2023, each time with proper documentation and witnesses. The first bequests were small personal items to neighbors and friends, her wedding ring to me, specifically, Grandpa's tools to me as well. Harold's face was already reddening as Thompson read through these smaller gifts, Patricia's fingers drumming impatiently on the table. They were waiting for the real assets, the house, the investments, the money they'd already spent in their minds. Then Thompson read the paragraph about Harold. Grandma Eleanor left him exactly $1,000, the same amount she'd given him for his wedding 35 years ago, stating this represented the full extent of what she owed him as his mother. The room went silent, except for the court reporter's keys clicking. Patricia jumped up her chair, scraping against the floor. She declared this was illegal, that they'd contested, that no court would uphold such blatant discrimination against a biological child. Richardson was already pulling out legal precedence cases, where wills were overturned, talking about elder abuse and undue influence. That's when I opened my leather folder and slid it across the table to Thompson. He recognized it immediately, having helped prepare some of the documents inside. His expression shifted from professional calm to something like anticipation as he opened it and began examining the contents. The first document was the voluntary termination of parental rights Harold and Patricia had signed in 1998, notarized and witnessed legally binding. Richardson grabbed it, scanning quickly, his face paling as he realized what it meant. Patricia tried to snatch it from him, claiming it was about custody, not inheritance, that it didn't apply to this situation. The second document was my legal adoption papers, complete and binding, making me their legal daughter with all rights that entailed. The third was a series of canceled checks, 25 years of financial support I'd provided for my grandparents, while Harold sent nothing. Every medical bill I'd paid, every household expense, every repair and maintenance cost. Thompson then pulled out a USB drive from the folder, plugging it into his laptop. On the screen appeared a video of Grandma Eleanor, dated just 2 months before her death, sitting in this very office. She was thin but alert, her voice clear as she explained her decisions, her reasoning, her complete understanding of what she was doing and why. In the video, she detailed Harold's abandonment, not just of me, but of her and Grandpa. She had copies of every birthday card she'd sent him that came back undeliverable because he'd moved without telling her. She had phone records showing she'd tried to call monthly for years, while he never called once. She had the invoice from Grandpa's funeral showing she'd paid for everything, while Harold contributed nothing. She spoke directly to the camera about finding out Harold and Patricia had been in the state multiple times for business, without visiting, staying in hotels 20 minutes from their house. She mentioned the time Grandpa had a heart procedure, and Harold said he couldn't afford to visit, then posted vacation photos from Hawaii on social media the same week. Richardson was sweating now, shuffling through his papers, trying to find something to counter this evidence. Harold's face had gone from red to white, his hands shaking as he watched his mother calmly, methodically destroy any claim he might have. Patricia was typing frantically on her phone, presumably researching whether the video could be challenged. But Thompson wasn't done. From my folder came email printouts, Harold's own words claiming he had no elderly parents to care for, on insurance forms listing himself as having no dependents on tax documents, while simultaneously trying to claim them for deductions. There were screenshots of Patricia's social media posts mocking elderly people, calling them drains on society, ironic, given her current attempt to drain Eleanor's estate. The worst was a recording I'd made of Harold during Grandma's final hospital stay, where he tried to convince me to get her to sign a new power of attorney. His voice was clear, talking about how much money was at stake, how we could split it if I cooperated, how she was going to die anyway, so why not benefit? He'd had no idea Pennsylvania was a one-party consent state for recordings. Thompson let all of this sink in before continuing with the will reading. Everything went to me. The house, the 3 rental properties, the investment accounts, the business, all of it. The only condition was that I continue running the accounting firm for at least 5 years, keeping Grandma Eleanor's professional legacy alive. There was also a sealed letter for me to be opened privately. Richardson tried one last argument, something about contesting mental capacity, but Thompson produced medical records from 3 different doctors, all confirming Grandma Eleanor's sound mind. He also mentioned that any contest would make all this evidence public record, including Harold's tax fraud and Patricia's financial crimes, which my folder also documented thoroughly. The meeting ended with Harold and Patricia storming out, Richardson trailing behind, looking defeated. Thompson handed me the sealed letter, and the original will shook my hand and said Grandma Eleanor would be proud. I sat alone in that conference room for a long time, holding her letter, not ready to read her final words yet. The legal battle lasted 4 months and cost Harold and Patricia over $200,000 in legal fees. They hired 3 different law firms when Richardson withdrew after seeing the evidence. Each firm promised they could break the will, find loopholes, prove undue influence, but each eventually came to the same conclusion, that the case was unwinnable. Their first strategy was claiming I'd isolated Grandma Eleanor from them, a form of elder abuse that would invalidate the will. But Thompson countered with proof that Harold and Patricia had never attempted regular contact, never sent letters or gifts, never invited her to visit them in California. Phone records showed they'd blocked her number for 2 years, during a period they now claimed they were trying to reconnect. The second approach involved challenging my adoption, claiming it was done improperly or under false pretenses. But the judge who'd overseen it, now retired, provided an affidavit stating it was one of the most clear-cut cases she'd handled with biological parents, who showed zero interest in maintaining any parental rights or relationships. They tried arguing that Grandma Eleanor lacked mental capacity due to her age and medical conditions. But the video deposition, the multiple doctor evaluations, and the careful, methodical way she'd prepared everything over 3 years showed a woman in complete control of her faculties and decisions. The discovery process revealed more than they'd wanted. Harold owed the IRS $537,000 in back taxes from unreported income. Patricia had been involved in a pyramid scheme in 2015 that defrauded elderly investors, resulting in civil judgments she'd never satisfied. Their consulting company was hemorrhaging money. Their California house was mortgaged 3 times, and they had 17 credit cards maxed out between them. Meanwhile, Thompson helped me secure the estate properly. The house appraisal came in at $850,000 more than expected due to recent development in the area. The 3 rental properties were worth another $1 million combined, all with reliable long-term tenants. The investment portfolio totaled $1.3 million, carefully diversified and managed conservatively. There was also something unexpected in the safety deposit box, a separate account in my name, that Grandma Eleanor had been funding since my adoption, marked for my education, but never used since I'd gotten scholarships. It had grown to $90,000, her way of ensuring I'd always have security, regardless of what happened with the will. The neighbors rallied around me during the legal fight. Mrs. Chen from next door testified about seeing me care for both grandparents over the years. Mr. Williams across the street provided security camera footage, showing me arriving every weekend during college, then moving in permanently when they needed help. Dr. Martinez confirmed I'd attended every medical appointment, asked informed questions, and advocated for their care. Harold and Patricia tried one last desperate move, offering to settle for just the California house's value if I'd drop the recording of Harold trying to manipulate me. They seemed to think I cared about money the way they did, that I'd trade my grandmother's trust for their convenience. I declined through Thompson, adding that the recording had already been provided to the IRS and California Attorney General's office. The judge's final ruling was devastating for them. Not only did she uphold the will completely, but she ordered them to pay my legal fees for bringing a frivolous lawsuit. She noted that they'd shown a stunning lack of shame in trying to profit from parents they'd abandoned, and that Eleanor's will represented the natural and just consequences of their life choices. After the ruling, they tried reaching out directly. Patricia left tearful voicemails about how family should forgive, how we could start fresh, how she'd always thought of me as the daughter she never had. Harold sent emails about business opportunities, how we could pool resources, how he could teach me about investing, as if Grandma Eleanor hadn't already done that. I had Thompson send them a cease and desist letter, making clear that any further contact would be considered harassment. The last I heard, they'd fled California to avoid creditors and were living in a studio apartment in Arizona. Their consulting company dissolved, their house was foreclosed, and Harold was working at a call center, while Patricia sold essential oils through social media. But I didn't celebrate their downfall. Grandma Eleanor had taught me better than that. Instead, I focused on building the life she'd envisioned for me, honoring the trust she'd placed in my hands. I moved back into the house, keeping her garden growing and Grandpa's workshop organized. The business expanded carefully, adding 2 employees who needed second chances, the way I'd needed one. I also discovered more about my grandparents through their papers. Love letters from their courtship photos, from trips they'd taken before Harold was born, dreams they'd had, and sacrifice for their son who ultimately disappointed them. There were journals where Grandma Eleanor wondered what she'd done wrong, how she'd raised someone capable of abandoning his own child. The rental properties provided steady income that I reinvested in the community. One became transitional housing for women leaving abusive relationships. Another offered reduced rent to elderly residents on fixed incomes. The third I kept as standard rental, using the income to fund the others and maintain Grandma Eleanor's tradition of quiet generosity. A year after the will reading, I stood in the expanded offices of what was now Davidson Financial Services. We'd grown from the spare bedroom to a proper downtown location, employing 10 people, including 2 former clients who'd lost jobs during economic downturn. Grandma Eleanor's portrait hung in the reception area, her knowing smile greeting everyone who entered. The scholarship fund I'd established in her and Grandpa's names had already helped 7 students attend community college. The requirement wasn't grades or test scores, but essays about overcoming abandonment and finding family in unexpected places. Every recipient reminded me that pain could become purpose if you let it. My life had structure, now routine, that honored their memory. Morning coffee in Grandma's favorite mug, tending her roses before work, using Grandpa's tools to maintain the house they'd loved. Evenings were for the business ledgers, ensuring every column balanced the way they taught me life eventually would, if you were patient and persistent. The biggest change came 8 months after settling the estate. I was volunteering at the youth shelter when I met Emma, an 8-year-old whose story echoed mine. Parents who'd chosen drugs over daughter-grandparents, trying their best, but aging out of ability. She had my same wary eyes, the careful way of holding herself that said she'd learned not to expect much from adults. The adoption process took 6 months faster than usual because I had everything prepared. Financial statements, home studies, references from the judge who'd overseen my grandparents' estate. When the social worker asked why I wanted to adopt, I told her about choosing family, about learning that love was action, not obligation, about passing forward what had been given to me. Emma moved in just before what would have been Grandma Eleanor's 91st birthday. Her room was my old one, repainted in purple because that was her favorite color, filled with books and toys and the security of knowing she was wanted. The first night, she asked if I was going to leave too. I showed her the adoption papers, let her hold them, promised her what my grandparents had promised me forever, no matter what. Teaching her was like reliving my childhood, but better. Pancakes on Saturday mornings. But now I knew how to make them properly. Garden work on Sundays, passing on Grandma's knowledge about which vegetables grew best together. Evening homework at the same kitchen table where Grandpa had taught me algebra using the same patient methods he demonstrated. Harold and Patricia sent one last letter through a different lawyer asking for compassion in their time of need. They were facing bankruptcy, possible criminal charges for tax evasion, and Patricia had been diagnosed with diabetes requiring expensive treatment. They suggested that Grandma Eleanor wouldn't want family to suffer, that helping them would honor her memory. I didn't respond directly. Instead, I made an anonymous donation to the free clinic in their Arizona town, ensuring it could provide diabetes medication to uninsured patients for a year. It wasn't for them, but for Grandma Eleanor, who, despite everything, never wished harm on anyone. But personal contact, financial support, any form of relationship, that door remained closed and locked. The house felt full again with Emma there. Her laughter replaced the silence, her questions filled the spaces grief had carved. She called me Mom within 3 months, the word tentative at first, then confident, like she was trying it on and finding it fit perfectly. We created new traditions while maintaining old ones, adding her story to the family narrative. One evening, while helping Emma with a school project about family trees, she asked about Harold and Patricia. I'd shown her photos, explained the basic history, neither demonizing nor excusing them. She studied their faces thoughtfully, then said they looked sad even when they were smiling. Out of the mouths of babes came wisdom that would have made Grandma Eleanor proud. Running the business became more than financial success. It was about helping other small companies grow, offering fair rates to people starting over, providing second chances, because I'd been given one. Every client meeting happened at the conference table Grandpa had built in his workshop, his craftsmanship anchoring modern technology to timeless values. The investigator Thompson hired to do periodic checks reported that Harold had been arrested for tax fraud, though charges were reduced to probation and payment plans he couldn't afford. Patricia's diabetes had worsened due to inability to afford consistent treatment. Their marriage was struggling, each blaming the other for their circumstances. They'd become cautionary tales in their own lives. But I focused forward, not backward. Emma thrived in stable environment, her grades improving, her confidence growing. She joined Girl Scouts, played soccer, made friends who came for sleepovers in the house that had sheltered me. Watching her bloom was like seeing myself heal retroactively, each of her achievements erasing an old wound. The business's 5th anniversary approached, fulfilling the will's requirement, though I had no intention of stopping. We'd become integral to the small business community, known for integrity and personal service that larger firms couldn't match. Grandma Eleanor's professional legacy lived on through every tax return, filed every small business that succeeded with our help. In her final letter to me, Grandma Eleanor had written about cycles and choices, how Harold had chosen himself while she'd chosen me, how I would someday choose someone else, passing on not genetics, but values, not blood, but belonging. She said the greatest inheritance wasn't money, but the knowledge that we're worthy of love, capable of giving it, and wise enough to recognize it when it appears. She was right as usual. The money had provided security, but the real inheritance was understanding that family isn't about DNA or legal documents. It's about showing up, staying when things get hard, choosing each other daily. It's teaching a scared little girl that she's safe now, the same way scared little me had been taught decades ago. Every night when tucking Emma in, I repeated the words Grandma Eleanor had said to me, that Grandpa Arthur had said before her: "Love you more than all the stars in the sky." Emma would giggle and counter with loving me more than all the fish in the sea, starting a gentle competition that always ended in hugs and the security of being chosen. Sometimes I wondered what Harold and Patricia thought about at night, if they ever understood what they'd thrown away. Not just money or property, but the chance to be loved unconditionally, to matter to someone, to leave a legacy beyond legal battles and bitter endings. But those thoughts never lingered long, displaced by Emma's needs. The business demands the life I was actively living, rather than the one they'd abandoned. The house remained unchanged in essential ways. Grandma's roses still bloomed each spring. Grandpa's tools still hung in order in the garage. But it was alive again, filled with homework and soccer cleats, business calls, and bedtime stories. The ghosts were gentle ones, approving presences that Emma swore she could feel when she was sad, invisible grandparents who'd somehow adopted her too. 5 years have passed since that November morning in Thompson's office, when my leather folder changed everything. The business has grown to 25 employees. The scholarship fund has helped 43 students. And Emma just gave a presentation at school about her hero, Grandma Eleanor, a woman she never met, but knows through stories and values lived daily. Last month, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a single photograph from 1998 showing me at age 7 standing between Harold and Patricia at the airport, the last picture taken of us together. On the back, in Patricia's handwriting, were 2 words, "We're sorry." Too little, too late. But I kept the photo anyway, filed with other documents that tell our complete story. Emma found it while helping me organize files and asked if those were my first parents. When I said yes, she studied it carefully, then handed it back, saying I looked sad in the picture, but happy in all the ones with Grandma and Grandpa. Such simple truth from a child who understood abandonment and choosing better. The lawyer Richardson reached out recently, not about Harold and Patricia, but asking if I'd consider teaching a seminar on ethical estate planning at the law school. He'd been impressed by how thoroughly Grandma Eleanor had protected her wishes and wanted students to understand that inheritance law was about more than money. I agreed, using her case as an example of justice served cold but complete. During the seminar, a student asked what I'd have done if Grandma Eleanor had left everything to Harold, despite his abandonment. The question caught me off guard, but the answer came easily. I'd have been disappointed, but not destroyed, because the real inheritance had already been given through years of daily love, patient teaching, consistent presence. The money just made justice visible. Thompson still sends holiday cards, always with notes about how proud Grandma Eleanor would be. The neighbors who testified for me have become chosen family Sunday dinners, rotating between houses. Mrs. Chen teaches Emma to cook Chinese food, while Mr. Williams shows her basic car maintenance, the village it takes to raise a child materializing naturally. The rental properties still serve their dual purpose, providing income and community service. One tenant, a woman who fled abuse with 3 children, just graduated nursing school. Another, an elderly veteran, tends the communal garden with the same care Grandpa showed. They don't know their below-market rent is subsidized by the third property only, that someone believed they deserve stability. Harold was released from federal prison after serving 18 months for tax evasion. Patricia divorced him during his incarceration, claiming she'd been unaware of his financial crimes, despite evidence suggesting otherwise. They both relocated separately, starting over in their 60s, with nothing but the knowledge that their choices had consequences they'd never imagined when abandoning a 7-year-old. But this story isn't about their downfall or my vindication. It's about Grandma Eleanor's wisdom in knowing that love isn't passive but active, requiring daily choices and constant presence. It's about Grandpa Arthur proving that fathers are made, not born, that DNA means nothing compared to showing up. It's about Emma learning that family finds you when you're ready to accept it. The accounting firm will go to Emma someday if she wants it, but without conditions. She'll have choices I didn't, opportunities earned through generations of sacrifice and wisdom. But more importantly, she'll have the certainty of being wanted, chosen, loved beyond measure or condition. She'll never wonder why she wasn't enough, because she's always been everything. Some nights I sit in Grandma Eleanor's reading chair, now reupholstered but still creaky, reviewing the day's ledgers while Emma does homework. The house settles around us with familiar sounds. The business runs smoothly. The future spreads out with promise rather than uncertainty. This is wealth beyond Harold and Patricia's comprehension, this quiet contentment of lives aligned with values. The folder that changed everything sits in the same safety deposit box where I found it, joined now by Emma's adoption papers, the business incorporation documents, scholarship fund records. Someday Emma will have her own key, her own moment of understanding how carefully love can be documented, how thoroughly justice can be prepared, how completely a family can be chosen. Recently, Emma asked if we could visit Harold and Patricia, not from desire, but curiosity. She wanted to understand how parents could leave, maybe needing reassurance that history wouldn't repeat. I told her maybe someday when she's older, if she still wants to, but that some people are better loved from distance, their primary value being cautionary tales. Instead, we visited Grandma Eleanor and Grandpa Arthur's graves, bringing fresh roses from the garden they'd planted. Emma arranged them carefully while telling them about her soccer season, her grades, her best friend's birthday party. She spoke to them like they were just temporarily away, which in many ways they were living on through every lesson learned and love passed forward. Walking back to the car, Emma slipped her small hand into mine and said she was glad they'd chosen me so I could choose her. Such profound understanding from someone so young, recognizing the chain of choice and chance that brought us together. Grandma Eleanor would have loved her fierce intelligence, Grandpa Arthur, her determined curiosity. The business thrives not through aggressive growth, but careful attention, the same way Grandma Eleanor built her estate slowly, steadily, surely. Every client matters, every detail counts, every promise gets kept. It's old-fashioned in an age of automation, but it works because people still value being seen, heard, helped by someone who understands struggle and survival. This Thanksgiving will mark 6 years since Grandma Eleanor's passing, 5 since the will reading, 4 since Emma came home. We'll host dinner for our chosen family, the table Grandpa built extended with all its leaves surrounded by people who showed up when it mattered. Harold and Patricia won't be there, but their absence no longer feels like loss, just the natural consequence of choices made decades ago. Before we eat, I'll tell the story again of Eleanor and Arthur Davidson. The giants who raised me, loved me, saved me. Emma will add her own memories now, the grandparents she knows through story, becoming more real with each retelling. The scholarship recipients we've invited will share how education changed their trajectories, how opportunity compounds when someone believes in you. And late that night, after everyone's gone home and Emma's asleep, I'll sit with Grandma Eleanor's final letter, the one I read only on important occasions. Her handwriting shaky but determined, reminding me that real wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the love we give and receive, the lives we touch, the justice we enable, through careful planning and patient waiting. She was right about everything, especially about Harold and Patricia returning like vultures to pick bones. What she maybe didn't anticipate was how thoroughly she'd armed me for that battle, not just with documents and recordings, but with the unshakable knowledge of my own worth. They came for money, but found only the daughter they'd discarded, transformed by love, into someone they couldn't recognize or manipulate. The folder sits in that safety deposit box, its contents now historical, rather than functional. But I remember the weight of it in my hands that morning. Leather worn smooth by Grandma Eleanor's handling documents, arranged with the same precision she brought to everything. It was her final gift, not revenge, but protection, ensuring that justice would prevail, even after her voice was silenced. Every night when I tuck Emma in after our competition of love comparisons, I see Grandma Eleanor in her peaceful sleep, Grandpa Arthur in her stubborn chin. Not genetics, but something deeper, the inheritance of souls who choose each other across time and circumstance. Love you more than all the stars in the sky, I whisper, and know that somewhere they're whispering it too. Thank you for joining me on this journey of justice served with patience and precision. If you've ever doubted whether family requires blood or just boundless love, I hope our story provides an answer. What defines family in your life? Is it DNA or daily choice? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with your own experiences of chosen family or finding justice after abandonment, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of triumph over betrayal. Share this with someone who needs reminding that real inheritance isn't about money, but about the love that shapes us into who we become. Thank you for listening. And remember, the best revenge isn't revenge at all, but living well surrounded by those who choose to stay.